Welcome everybody. If you can, we just open it up. But if you're able to post a comment in the chat where you're from, what you're most excited about for today's discussion, it'd be great. It'll help also our presenters get an idea of just where you're from and what. Thank you for joining us today for the STEM Community Lunchtime Conversations. My name is Jeremy Babender, and hosting with me today is Beth Nickel from Arizona Science Center. And today we are really excited to talk with several experts on water sustainability in the desert.
Great, everybody. Thank you again for joining. So today we're going to be, talking about living in the desert and all of the extra challenges and constraints to our water sources, lands, and our residents. Today we have with us a few special guests to share their knowledge and experiences in this area. Our presenters for this session are Katie Akins, Director of Education from Arizona Farm Bureau, Monica Ochoa, Water Resources Process Engineer from Palo Verde Generation Station, John Adams, Deputy Director from Biosphere 2, and Patty Aaron, Public Affairs Officer from the Bureau of Reclamation, Lower Colorado Basin Region. Thank you all for joining us today and speaking with us. Next slide. These conversations were brought about in order to meet the needs of the community with the following goals in mind. And we thank you again for participating in this important discussion.
So with no further ado, I want to cue Katie Akins, the Director of Education from the Arizona Farm Bureau, to kick us off. Thank you for being here, Katie.
Of course, thank you for having me. Excited to be here and talk a little bit about water as it relates to agriculture, because we all know that water is essential for all living things. And agriculture is also essential for all living things, and we can't have one without the other. But what most people don't realize is that we actually have some of the best agriculture happening right here in the desert. Next slide, please. In fact, agriculture here in Arizona is a $23.3 billion industry. Yes, that was with a B. As you can see here on this wheel, agriculture has actually put Arizona on the map. Here in the desert, we rank number 2 in the production of lemons, cauliflower, broccoli, and also honeydew. Our producers produce more than 80% of the nation's rose bushes here. And Arizona producers also make up 90% of the nation's leafy greens in the wintertime, which gives us the title of the winter lettuce capital of the world. Our nearly 300 days of sunshine each year contribute to much of the success of our farmers, but we can't forget about the other essential component that's necessary for this success, and that, of course, is water. With less than 9 inches of rainfall each year, our farmers must rely on irrigation, that rain from a different day, to water our crops. Next slide, please. Because of this, as you might imagine, Arizona agriculture is always going to be a large water user here. But we have to remember that water use does not mean water waste. The water our farmers are using becomes, next slide, things like the fruits, the vegetables, the sheets that you use, the jeans that you wear, and even the money that you are using every single day. How does that work? Because even our money is 75% cotton, which is a crop grown by our Arizona farmers. On average, each American will use between 80 and 100 gallons of water per day. And that's just the obvious things, right? Like drinking, taking a bath, washing the dishes. But there's this invisible water use piece, like the clothes that we wear, that contributes another 1,800 gallons per day of water use for each individual. That's the water we drink, we eat, we wear, and then of course we use. So it's important to remember that agriculture water is your water, and it's the water that we use every day. But just because it is necessary does not mean that our farmers are taking that water for granted. In fact, our farmers have been able to use 12% less water to harvest an acre of crops than they did 10 years ago. So that's pretty good, 12% less. This can be attributed to the irrigation technologies, planting cycles, plant genetics that continue to be developed and advanced each and every day. So you're probably wondering what irrigation actually looks like in our state. So depending on where you are in Arizona, you might see irrigation a little bit differently. The first one we're going to talk about today is flood or basin irrigation. And this is the most common type of irrigation. As you can see from the photo here, this is where water runs down the rows. And although it does not look very techy, there is a lot of water saving strategies that are being implemented. Things like satellite guided tractors that laser level the fields, allowing every plant to be watered evenly, and also allowing for very little runoff or pooling. So each crop has the equal amount of water. Another thing doesn't seem very techy, but that our farmers are doing is using concrete lined ditches as opposed to dirt lined ditches, because this allows for less water loss through the transportation of the canals and ditches from the water's original source. So that's an idea of what flood or basin irrigation looks like. And on the next slide, you'll see something that might be familiar to you because perhaps at your home, you use sprinkler irrigation. This is another type of irrigation that our farmers use. It can be used for several crops, but it's important to recognize that not all crops can be watered using sprinkler irrigation. It's just not as efficient or effective for them. So sprinklers allow for less water to be lost, of course, through evaporation here in the warm desert. Sprinklers can be used, as you see here, in rows, and they can also be used through a pivot irrigation system. If you've ever gone on an airplane and you've seen the crop circles, those crops are being watered by pivot irrigation, and that's why they're in that circular design. You go to the next slide for me, please. This is an example of what drip tape irrigation looks like. So there is tape that is put through the rows with holes put in them. And this is being used on some farms to, again, eliminate some of the loss to evaporation. Now, the next slide is one of the ways that our farmers are watering crops today that helps a lot with the loss of water or conserving water. Here with subsurface or drip irrigation, the lines are dug many feet below the surface and can take water directly to the root zone of the plant, which, as you might imagine, is very efficient. For some crops, this can provide more crop per drop, as we like to say, making the crops produce a higher yield, and it allows for little loss through evaporation and runoff. But like most technology, it's important to recognize that even this can have its challenges. But Arizona producers continue to make great strides in applying the latest in technology to assure that they are applying water in the most economic and efficient manner possible. Using all the tools in their toolbox, farmers are using real-time soil monitoring technologies to read soil moisture that allows them to adjust their irrigation schedules. Farmers are also using seeds that have been bred to produce or grow using less water, those drought-resistant crops. And research is also being done on lower water use crops, such as, I don't know if you've heard of Waiuli before, but that is a crop that can be produced using far less water. Another important thing to know that farmers are doing is crop rotations. So farmers are also using crop rotations that include warm season crops that allow those crops to reach maturity by early summer. So they're requiring less water or irrigation through the summertime. So another way that conservation is being used. So conserving water.
You gotta stop. If you're getting too close to a point where you're.
Oh yeah, I was on my last sentence. You were pretty good right there. Yeah. So conserving water has always been a focus of our farmers. After all, they do have to pay for every drop of water they use. And I think that's something that people don't recognize as well. So I know that was pretty quick, but it is hard to cover Arizona ag water in 5 minutes. So hopefully if you guys have questions, you can put those in the box a little bit later.
Yeah, if you can, actually, we'd encourage everybody to just start putting your questions in now, and that'll help for Q&A, along with Katie might be able to answer some of them as well as we move on. So next, We have Monica Ochoa, Water Resources Process Engineer from the Palo Verde Generation Station. So thank you for being here, Monica. I'm really excited to hear what you're up to. So take it away.
Well, thank you. I'm just going to go through the introduction to water resources. Next slide. So Palo Verde Water Resources is a tertiary treatment plant. It has a capability of processing 90 million gallons per day of wastewater from the cities of Phoenix, Scottsdale, Tempe, Mesa, Glendale, Goodyear, and Tolleson. Next slide, please. So how does the water get here? Next. 28.5 miles of gravity flow with a 100-foot elevation drop, 8 miles pump flow with a 150-foot elevation increase. So we start with 91st Avenue wastewater treatment. The water flows 6 miles of 114 gravity flow pipe. Then it goes to a 22.5 miles of 96-inch gravity flow pipe and makes its way to the Hacienda pump station. And then it goes 8 miles of 66-inch pressure flow. And finally, it goes to water resources. Next slide, please. Now, the water goes through a water softening process. So the water softening is it minimizes scale potential, maximizes water use, minimizes quantity of water required. So the scale forming constituents are alkalinity, calcium, magnesium, silicon, phosphate. So the effluent quality in chemistry, parts per million, you notice it's a little high there, but then when we're done treating it, the effluent quality, our chemistry in parts per million is lower. Next slide, please. So let's go through the process. First animation, please. So water flows from the pipeline into the trickling filter unit, which removes the ammonia. And then it flows to the first stage and then to the second stage clarifiers, which remove phosphates, magnesium, silica, and calcium through chemical treatment. Then sulfuric acid is used to reduce the pH. And then we add chlorine for biologicals. And then finally, it flows to the gravity filters to remove suspended solids. And then from there, it'll flow to our 85 and 45 acre storage reservoir. But before we go to the reservoirs, I just want to discuss real quick, if you could go to the first animation. This is our solids handling and removal area. We also have a chemical storage and feed unit. Next, site chemical storage feed. And then we have our domestic and demined water treatment. Next slide, please. Now let's get back to the reservoirs. So we have an 85 acre and a 45, which is pressurized through a makeup header and flows to our circulating water intake canal. And we have 3 of those because we have 3 units. Now the treated effluent is used to cool the condenser and plant cooling water and heat exchangers. So water evaporates in the cooling towers, removing the heat. The chemistry is controlled by additions and blowdown, and that blowdown goes to our evap ponds, our evaporation ponds, which water evaporates, leaving behind our solids. Next slide, please. Those are the cooling towers. We have 3 cooling towers for each unit. Our 2020 cooling tower use was 74,386 acre feet, which comes out to 24 billion gallons for the year. Our cooling water cycles are 27, and 27 is awesome. So 25,000 to 29,000 total dissolved solids in parts per million. That's our average for the year. So we've been doing really well and really working with our chemistry department because majority of our plant is all chemistry and math and chemistry. You see a lot of equipment out there, but basically is a lot of chemistry. That's all I have. Thank you.
Well, thank you for that. It's really awesome just to hear about the chemistry and physics behind that. I remember taking a tour of the power plant it's almost might have been 20 years ago. It's just so amazing to see what happens there, and just I appreciate the up close.
It's an amazing plant. I
Diagrams
love
that
it
you
there. So I just can't say anymore. It's a good plant.
So thank you. And again, if you can, start posting some questions for Monica or for the later discussion that are being sparked as we're going on. Next, I want to cue John Adams, the Deputy Director from Biosphere 2. Thank you for being here, John.
Thanks for the opportunity. So, my presentation is going to be a little bit different, focusing on, if we can go back to the first slide, just for context. There you go. So for those of you who aren't familiar, or maybe those who haven't been here recently, Biosphere 2 is located in southern Arizona. It is a large, completely enclosed facility that houses different ecosystems. And, as we all face the challenges of a changing climate and the impact that that's going to have on water resources, one of the key features is trying to better understand and be able to better predict how that water resource is going to be distributed within different ecosystems. And, we start at the laboratory level and then we work to making field observations. Well, Biosphere 2 is that intermediate step. So we can go to the next slide. And, I really think of Biosphere 2 as, a super collider for the earth sciences. And what I mean by that is maybe some of you have seen that image there on the left, the Large Hadron Collider. So we're smashing atoms together to, try to figure out what are those fundamental building blocks. Conversely, here in Southern Arizona, the University of Arizona is really well known for creating some of the most sophisticated and largest telescope mirrors. Those mirrors are deployed into space on remote mountaintops to try to look to the ends of the universe. But in my opinion, we haven't created an equivalent tool to understand Earth systems. And we are all so dependent, as we've heard from the two prior presentations, and I know the final one, how dependent we are on those resources, and subtle changes in those resources change the dynamics of the resources we get. And so Biosphere 2 is that tool. It's unprecedented. There's nothing else like it in the world, and really gives us a unique opportunity. And it's located right here in Southern Arizona. So what are we doing inside Biosphere 2 to better understand the fate of water in our environments? We can go to the next slide. So one of the systems that we have inside is we actually have a fully established rainforest. And I know it's like, well, what's that connection between a rainforest and Southern Arizona? Obviously, our climate is very different from that, which is found down around the Amazon basin, which this system was originally modeled after. But the connection is that understanding the fundamental behavior and principles of water is crucial. And what we were able to do with this team and these images you see here is this was an international collaboration, and they wanted to understand the dynamics in this particular system when we subjected it to a 70-day drought, and how did it change its cycling of carbon, energy, and water in the system. What we can do inside Biosphere 2 that is much more difficult to do in outside environments is we can actually introduce tracers. So we can label the water that we add or reintroduce to the system either before or at the conclusion of that drought to look exactly what plants are picking that water up, when they're picking it up, and how they're distributing it within their structure. Is it simply being stored in the lower portion of the stem? Maybe it's being sort of released through the lower leaves, or maybe it's going all the way to the top. And which plants are picking those up? How does that hydraulic lift within the soil change? And again, it's these fundamental principles that can be used across the board to better understand the behavior and movement of water, especially subterraneanly. I mean, the hydrologist will tell you that it's still very much a black box once it goes below the surface. So next slide. So one of the systems that the University of Arizona, who now owns and runs Biosphere 2 and has done so for nearly 13 years, is they repurposed a particular area inside Biosphere 2 and built what you see here in front of you. We call this the Landscape Evolution Observatory. Its fundamental design principles are around the question of trying to better understand it rains in the mountains, how much water ends up downstream for societal needs, and what impacts the quality of that water as you have land use change. And so although not really apparent in this slide, but you can sort of see through the glass, you might be able to see sort of the outline of a mountain range. That's the Santa Catalina Mountains here in Southern Arizona. And for those of you who sort of saw on the news, a significant portion of that mountain range burned last summer. how is that going to change the dynamics of the snow that's currently capping those tops and as it runs off? And how will it change not only from this season, but in seasons to come, especially as we see vegetation repopulate many of those areas that were burned? Well, LEO, the Landscape Evolution Observatory, was built specifically to try to better understand those dynamics. The material that you see here, that black material, is actually a volcanic basalt from northern Arizona. It was specifically selected so that we could understand how this material weathers, and that weathering in turn translates into hydrologic dynamics. And secondly, we can then add vegetation to look at how it responds. The next slide. We also have an ocean where we're looking at better understanding how corals respond to changes in temperature. And so at Biosphere 2, right here in Southern Arizona, not only are we looking at sort of the more specific site questions, but also questions that are going to impact worldwide resources. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for, that. I always get blown away when we talk about having Biosphere 2 in Arizona. It's just such a gem and unique resource that we have here. And thanks for just giving a preview of that in 5 minutes. And again, if you have questions, start posting them in the chat. That'd be great. Finally, I want to cue Patty Aaron, the Public Affairs Officer from the Bureau of Reclamation's Lower Colorado Basin region. So thank you, Patty, for being here.
Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. I'm just going to jump in. So if you could go to the next slide, please. I'll start with a little background about the Bureau of Reclamation. The agency is part of the Department of the Interior, and it was established in 1902 and serves the 17 western states, as you can see here. We're the nation's largest wholesaler of water and the second largest producer of hydroelectric power. The water we deliver supports the production of 60% of the produce and 25% of the nuts and fruits for the country. Next slide, please. So let's focus in on today's topic, the Colorado River. It's like no other river in the world. It's 1,450 miles long and stretches from the headwaters of the Colorado Rockies to the Gulf of California and Mexico. It flows through the hottest and driest parts of the country where water is vitally important. I always say it's the hardest working river in, oh, I'm not ready to move yet, thank you. As manager of the river, we're faced with competing demands such as farms, cities, tribes, power production, recreation, fish and wildlife in a neighboring country. Agriculture is the dominant use of the river's water. 5.5 million acres of farmland are served, accounting for approximately 70% of the Colorado River water used in the United States. 40% of the river is exported outside of the hydrologic boundaries of the basin for use in adjacent areas, and that includes the agriculture. And in fact, it serves many major metropolitan areas such as Albuquerque, Denver, Salt Lake City, and Los Angeles. The river accounts for $1.4 trillion of the nation's economy annually and serves more than 40 million people. Next slide, please. The Colorado River flows through 7 United States and 7 states in the United States and 2 in Mexico. It's split into 2 regions, the upper basin and the lower basin, as you can see by the different colors on the map here. Operations and water deliveries are governed by the law of the river, which is a collection of laws, agreements, and a Supreme Court decree, and it is a long and complex list. Each basin is allocated 7.5 million acre feet of water each year, and an additional 1.5 million acre feet is reserved for delivery to Mexico. Next slide, please. The regional office that I work for covers the lower basin. There are 4 major dams on the lower Colorado River. We have Hoover Dam, which impounds Lake Mead, which is the largest reservoir of the United States. Davis Dam, Parker Dam, and the Imperial Diversion Dam, which diverts water to the All-American Canal. The 3 lower basin states have annual allocations of river water. Arizona's allocation is 2.2 million acre feet a year. California's is 4.4 million acre feet, and Nevada is just 300,000 acre feet. Next slide, please. As we are all well aware, the Southwest is in its 22nd year of drought. You can see the impact on Lake Mead here. The photo on the left is Lake Mead in the year 2000 at the beginning of the drought. It was about 95% full in this photo. On the right, you see the reservoir in 2016. This was the lowest it had been in recent years. The elevation was 1,071 feet above sea level, and Lake Mead was about 39% full. That bathtub ring you see is about 140 feet tall. We're projecting that it might be at this low level again by this summer, and there's a very high likelihood that the lower basin is going to see its first ever declared shortage condition for the calendar year of 2022. Next slide, please. I'll close by saying that we're working hard with the states, tribes, and all of our other stakeholders to address these issues and continue to provide a reliable and sustainable water supply. Collaboration and communication are the hallmark on the Colorado River, and it continues. And here's my contact information. I'm always happy to chat with anybody about the issues, and thank you for your time.
Thank you, Patty, for giving that great presentation again. Right at 5 minutes. That's perfect. This is water. I found as a pretty it's a huge topic. A lot of questions. I think there's a lot of concerns, and it impacts everybody's life. And so we're trying to cover it in 20 minutes. It's probably I think a lot's going to happen in our breakouts. But there's a few questions in the chat. I don't know if we address anyone specific, but I think overall they kind of lean to the that question about water potability and how external sources can impact that water. A couple were about mining and other pieces, but maybe in uranium mining and other types of mining. Maybe I don't know if our panelists anybody can talk to about how do we know about the potability of water and how that can be impacted from your different angles, because I think there's 4 different perspectives that'd be pretty unique. So maybe start with, actually, who wants to start? Maybe Katie. I guess we can go in order with Katie if you feel comfortable starting with that one.
I'm going to be honest, I missed the question because I'm answering a question in the chat.
Okay, so maybe does anybody else want to take that on first? It's about the potability of water. Just how do we know if water is potable, and these type of external potential impacts like mining and other pieces.
Well, I mean, I know from an ag standpoint, especially when you're talking about, all of our vegetable farming in Yuma, which is where a lot of that is happening in Maricopa County, because of leafy green acts and because of different food safety protocols, the water that is used on those vegetables are all tested to make sure that it meets the safety guidelines. So that is something that they are always monitoring, is the source of that water and the quality of the water that is being put on the crops.
Thanks. Then Monica, John, or Patty, do you want anything else to follow up on that one?
Well, actually, we get our wastewater, of course, from 91st Avenue. And we do have specifications. We look at total dissolved solids, our chlorides, magnesium, but basically total dissolved solids on our part. Of course, we have wastewater, so it's not potable, but I mean, by the time we do process it, I mean, it shows that at our circ water circulating area, we also have specs there too, just to ensure that we are within our specifications.
So we've got a couple more coming in. So we have one, are there any thoughts on encouraging water harvesting by the state or restrictions on swimming pools or getting gray water for lawns? Is that probably more a Patty question?
We actually, those regulations are within the states. We deliver the water to the states, and then what happens to it from there is up to the state.
And then one was directed, yeah, what about, so Tony is asking, what about water sustainability for communities that rely on groundwater? And I know that's a really big thing in Arizona that, there's a lot of people saying there's enough groundwater, and then other cases where people are saying there's not enough water. So that's a great question. Who would be best to answer that one?
Well, Palo Verde Water Resources, again, uses wastewater, and we're looking at different areas of innovation, as well as instead of just getting all of our water from either Tolleson or 91st, we're looking at different areas that have brackish water with a TDS of 13,000 or higher, and then treat that. So we're looking at alternatives as well.
And then we had a question in the chat about animal agriculture. Is it lost or reusable? That's probably mostly Katie, right?
Yeah, I was just starting to respond to that one in the chat. So a lot of that water is reused within the operations. So of course, I can't give you specific ones because every operation is going to be different, whether that's Smithfield, Pigs for Farmer John and Snowflake, whether that's Riverview Dairy, or all of our different dairies. But we have many of our animal operations that are able to reuse nearly or recycle nearly all of the water that's used within their operations. Whether that is the recycled waters being used to flush the alleyways, the pins, and then is put in the ponds to sit before it can then be used to put on feed crops for the animals. So there is constant recycling that's happening on our animal farms.
So CSO Santiago asked a question about the sustainable use of water in a city. And I'm actually curious if John might address that one first, just from the perspective of, that closed system in the biosphere too is probably some really interesting things.
Yeah, I mean, so obviously here in the Southwest, we obviously have a much drier climate. Our dew point is lower, and so we typically see higher evaporation rates. And in city, obviously, if we're looking to preserve greater water resources in the Southwest, minimizing, I think, those large surface areas that promote greater amounts of evaporation, especially during our summer months, is one way that you can move to sustain a greater amount of those water resources. We also know that vegetation does transpire, but also it can be used in a way that benefits areas from a cooling perspective. And sort of as a tangential thing from this sort of dovetails into some of our agricultural discussions. There are studies, and one going on here at Biosphere as well, in conjunction with one of our faculty, but using, for example, plants underneath of solar panels. So they call it agrovoltaics. And that in conjunction with the two actually has a mutual benefit. In this particular case, the plant's transpiration cools the underside of the panels, which makes them more efficient. And so you're gaining some benefit from that crop for energy production. And the panels themselves provide a shaded environment. And in many cases, a lot of these agricultural crops are well in excess of their needed light, even in the shaded environment of a panel here in the Southwest. And so it extends their growing season. And in some cases, actually, you see an increase in production. So those are some things that we're doing here that, as we move to more sustainable or renewable energy sources, those are some things that could be benefited from plants. And we know the addition of plants also helps to shade and cool our homes and other things, which in turn lessens your energy production, which means that those energy plants oftentimes are using, basically cooling towers and other means to keep their equipment cool. They'll use less water if the demand is less. So it has a cascading effect, and every little bit helps.
With that, there's so much we can discuss about water. Wanted to transition it to Hope, and hopefully we'll have some great conversations in the breakouts. And so thank you again to our 4 speakers. I'm hoping you'll be able to stay for the breakouts as the next phase. So take it away, Hope.
Yeah, thank you, Jeremy. And thank you to all of our presenters. I really appreciate all your time. I know 5 minutes goes so quick, and it's a topic that we could talk, probably each of you could talk 5 to 50 hours on, right? With all your expertise. So I appreciate you being able to put it into 5 minutes, kind of putting a quick bow around it, and then being willing to answer those questions as they come in. So thank you very much to each and every one of you for your time today. We're going to transition into breakout rooms. And in the chat, I just put the Google Doc. So you'll have 4 different moderators in each of the rooms. And these are just some guiding questions. So you'll get to introduce yourself to one another. And then we'll talk about some technologies or innovations in this idea of clean water and sustainable water. And then any resources that are out there. I've seen several drop in the chat. Resources, whether it's education, whether it's a company, whatever that looks like, put those in there, because we aggregate all this together into a PDF and we send it out to anybody who is registered. So any thoughts in there, go ahead and do that. We'd love to see the resources and share those information with our community. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and put, we have Beth is in room 1 as your moderator. Room 2 is Casey. Room 3 is Dee, and room 4 is Fritz. All right, so I'll go ahead and open those rooms. Everybody has a Google Doc. They're going to take notes, but you take notes in there as well. We encourage you to do that. So thank you all, and we'll come back here in about 15 to 16 minutes. All right, enjoy your conversation. Well, welcome back, everyone. We hope you had a great conversation. I know 15 minutes goes by really quickly, but hopefully the guiding questions were good and you had some good conversations. What I'd love to do is just a real quick recap maybe of what you talked about, or a highlight, maybe one highlight you had from the breakout room. Casey, would you like to go first? Put you on the spot.
No, you're good. Yeah, so I think one of the big things that we talked about was just the fact that there are so many resources that are out there. And I think that's one of the great things about these STEM community lunchtime conversations is we had both Palo Verde and oh my gosh, the Biosphere 2 and someone from the White Tanks Regional Park, and all three have educational programs and resources about water. And it's just, yeah, the fact that there's so much out there and figuring out how to better disseminate those opportunities to teachers and students.
Yeah, I think that's what Jan and I were just talking about a little bit before everybody jumped on, right? There's the research component, which is super important, and then there's the education component, and they're both, but how do you get that information out to people so they actually know where it is and they can digest it? So that's great, Casey. Thank you. Beth, what about you? Anything in your breakout room that you'd like to highlight?
Yeah, a couple different things. Talking a little bit more specifically about some of the educational programs. Katie mentioned Project WET, which is actually a national, they've got a national curriculum, but something that I'm familiar with from my previous world. And then also something I wasn't familiar with, which is the Arizona Teacher Summer Agriculture Institute at the University of Arizona. And so I guess it's been going on for about 30 years, and they're able to expand their numbers, but it's really an opportunity for teachers to obtain some professional development and really meet and talk with different individuals in the agriculture world, from the farmers to producers, et cetera. So I thought that was really interesting. And then again, just really, we spent a little bit of time also talking about agriculture sustainability and how in the state of Arizona, we do produce quite a few of our fruits and vegetables, and that actually we are seeing that when we go into the grocery and we find, company packages of things from, other companies. So just talked a lot about that as well.
Great, thank you, Beth. And then Fritz, what about you? Just maybe one highlight that gleaned from your group?
One highlight was that if students learn at an early age through science projects or education about where water comes from and water use at home, it really can set a precedent for the rest of their life about how precious water can be and how easy it is to save it and waste it.
I think, Fritz, that's a great point, right? It's like starting young. I mean, we can all learn, but if we're learning those principles at a young age, right, it makes it much easier as time goes on, right? And just they can keep gathering information, but they already have that foundation there. So I think that's a great highlight. And then Dee, do you want to do a quick share out for your group?
Absolutely. So it was very nice to have people that were actually interested in being part of the conversation. So I just want to say thank you to those that did share while we were in our breakout. But we learned that Lucia is doing some really interesting work with her school. They are working on a project in regards to recycling of water. And that was really cool. And she was telling us how the kids have actually built the testers themselves too. So it's not like they're going online and ordering resources. They're doing it all themselves. I thought that was pretty interesting. And of course, Patty from the Bureau of Reclamation shared a couple of really interesting websites for resources. So that was nice.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Dee. And I appreciate, again, thank you to all of our presenters today for taking time to come talk really about this important topic. Thank you to our moderators for jumping in, taking those notes. Fritz and I will be aggregating those to make sure that we have sources out. Feel free over up until like Tuesday to put any additional resources in that document. We have our resources page on our SciTech Institute website, and we're happy to add resources to that. We'll put it in our document that send out. So keep sharing those. We want to be able to get those out to people as much as possible. And then we hope you can join us next STEM Community Lunchtime Conversation, which will be on April 1st, I believe, and it's Robotics and Beyond, Creating Change in the World. So that will be the next topic for the STEM Community Lunchtime Conversation. So thank you all again for joining us today. We really appreciate you being here. This will be has been recorded, and we will make sure to send out the recording to you along with all the other goodies that we talked about Tuesday of next week. So thank you all for being here. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.